When starting to prepare tender documentation, it is important to define what the subject matter of the contract is to be. And next, express this in the form of technical specifications, which are regulated in Article 42 of the directive. Public buyer enjoys fairly wide discretion in defining what the subject matter of the contract is to be. This is because procurement law is less concerned with what contracting authorities buy, but how they buy it. The definition of the subject matter of the contract shall be done in a manner that is not affecting access to the tender by other EU operators or operators from countries with equivalent rights. So in other words, the EU procurement principles in Article 18 and objective of open competition needs to be ensured and secured. That in practice means that one cannot define the subject matter of a contract, let's say, as furnitures with reduced environmental and social impact supplied by national producers only. Such a definition, due to the national restriction, is discriminatory and does not allow the free movement of goods. So consequently, it is prohibited under EU procurement law. Instead, the subject matter of the contract can be solely defined as furnitures with reduced environmental and social impact. A good practice is to fully commit to sustainable purchasing already from the beginning when defining the subject matter. What does that mean and how it can be done? For example, instead of initiating a tender for purchasing paper and later deciding how to choose the most sustainable one, an alternative could be sending a clear message to the market from the very beginning. This message would be that the buyer is not interested in purchasing any paper, but the tender seeks to buy specifically a supply of ecological or recycled paper. Another example could be purchasing not solely of catering services, but socially responsible catering services. Those titles already send a quite strong message to the market. Of course, what this terminology means must be translated into technical specification and other procurement documents, which we will discuss in a second. It is worth noting that it follows from the Court of Justice case law in Borta, Tines, DiMaggio and others that the subject matter of the contract, and by extension the technical specification, must be clearly determined from the beginning of the award procedure for the contract, and the conditions and the detailed rules of the award procedure must be drawn up in a clear, precise and unequivocal manner in the contract notice or specification, so that first, all reasonably informed tenderers exercising ordinary care can understand the extent, significance and importance interpret them in the same way. And second, the contracting authority is able to ascertain whether the bids submitted satisfy the criteria applying to the contract in question. So, what are technical specifications? They are requirements relating to subject of the contract, or in other words, a description of characteristics of what the public buyer wants to buy. These characteristics can include a reference to a specific process or a method of production, or provision of the requested works, supplies or services, or a specific process for another stage of a life cycle, even where such factors do not form a part of the material substance of what it is that we're buying. This means that the specification for organic food, renewable electricity, biodegradable packaging, recyclable construction materials are all acceptable in principle. This follows from the Dutch coffee case. The requirement is that these factors are linked to the subject matter of the contract, and they are proportionate to its value and objectives. The provisions on technical specification include express social dimension, where for all procurements which are intended for use by natural persons, the technical specification must, except in justified cases, be drawn up as to take into account accessibility criteria for persons with disabilities or designed for all users. The requirement for accessibility is applicable not only when it comes to general public, but also if it is applicable only for the internal users, such as employees of the public buyer. Technical specifications are one of the most important documents of procurement process. The ability to meet the technical specification is the prerequisite for being considered a candidate for the contract. The purpose of technical specification is twofold. Firstly, they describe the contract to the market so that companies can decide whether they are interested in participating in the tender process. Therefore, this will determine the level of competition for a specific contract. Secondly, they provide measurable requirements against which the tenders can be evaluated. They constitute a minimum compliance criteria. If bids are not complying with the technical specification, they have to be rejected, unless submission of variants has been expressly allowed in the tender. Now on to how shall we formulate the technical specifications? Well, they can be defined by reference to European, international, or national standards and/or in terms of performance or functionality. What is crucial to have in mind is that if a reference to a standard is used, it must be accompanied by the words or equivalent. Technical specification may also refer to appropriate criteria that are defined in labels. Annex 7 of the Directive 2014/24 EU allows a public buyer to define technical specifications in terms of environmental and climate performance level of a product, service, or work. For example, you may require that printing machine does not consume more than a certain amount of energy per hour. The public buyer may also specify the production process or methods. It might be required that, for example, paper is produced without using chlorine, or food is organically produced, or electricity is generated from renewable sources. Besides the reference to standards, it is allowed for the public buyer to apply specifications based on performance or functional requirements. What is performance-based or functional specification? What we mean by that, how it is to be done. Performance-based or functional specification is a specification that focuses on the function of what is being bought or fulfillment of needs rather than setting the exact requirements for the execution. The functional specification will describe the desired result and which outputs, such as quality, are to be achieved. It will not define the input or work method for the bidder. This approach is perceived as more innovative and flexible as it relies on the market know-how, allowing companies a space to propose a most appropriate solution based on their knowledge and expertise. A good example of how this can be done is the tender of energy efficient school in Malta, an example mentioned by the Commission's Buying Green Handbook. A public buyer described technical specification by requiring that a new school building be energy self-sufficient throughout the use of on-site renewable energy production. However, specific technical specification on methods of energy productions were not provided. This allowed bidder to suggest various solutions. The winning bidder in its proposal suggested installing a solar panel, or actually numerous solar panels and wind turbines. Another aspect of the technical specification that we need to consider, so-called make or source. Unless justified by the subject matter of the contract, technical specifications are not allowed to refer to specific make or source, or a particular process that characterizes the products or services provided by a specific economic operator. An example of this can be referring to the BMW brand of vehicles or Lenovo computers in the technical specification. Even if justified, there must always be an inclusion of words or equivalent. The reference to a specific brand has been the subject of many of the European Court of Justice judgments. Just to mention a few, we can point out towards Commission versus Ireland, where the tender required to use of particular pipes certified as complying with the Irish technical standard for constructing a main water contract. The court has found that such a specification impeded import within the EU internal market. Therefore, equivalency should have been allowed. Similarly, in the Commission versus Netherlands, the tender required using Unix operating system for supply and maintenance of a weather station contract. Here, the court ruled that the lack of inclusion of words or equivalent may impede the internal market trade and therefore violates EU rules. The same approach is also applicable to the tenders below the EU threshold, as an example of which can be the case Vestergaard. The tender required the use of specific Danish make of windows for work contracts. The court ruled that even though the contract fell below the thresholds, the tender must respect the treaty rules on free movement of goods. Consequently, it should have included the words or equivalent. The last aspect for today's video that I would like to consider is whether a public buyer can introduce a change to technical specifications later on in the procurement process. The short answer is that changing technical specification during the procurement procedure is limited. The Court of Justice confirms this in Borta case, where the court states that public buyer, and I'm quoting right now, cannot in principle during an award procedure amend the scope of technical specification on which economic operators concerned have legitimately relied on in order to take the decision to prepare the submission of a tender, or the contrary, to decide not to participate in the award procedure. That being the case, it does not follow that in any amendment to the tender specification as a matter of principle and in all circumstances be prohibited. That the contracting authority has the possibility on an exceptional basis to correct or amplify the information in the tender specifications which require mere clarification, or to correct obvious material errors, provided that all the tenderers are informed.